Thanks everyone for joining us live. And you know what future leadership is all about. It's about being the change that we want to see in the world. And in this session, it's a very interesting session where we are going to explore what is life purpose. Is it an elusive thing? And there are many reasons why people think they haven't found their life purpose. And there are many misconceptions around it. So what we'll do as a panelist here, we would unpack what purpose is. And one of them is one of the misconceptions is about how you're looking for purpose. Many people think that purpose can be found under a rock. So we're going to unpack, and then people think that they have to turn the rock and they'll find their purpose. So those kind of misconceptions go around finding purpose and maybe even meaning. So here we have 3 panelists. Corey, who was here before, once with us, and he's the CEO of Metlang Energy. He's based in South Africa. Greg, in Johannesburg in South Africa, and Greg is a psychologist and an executive coach. He's based in Port Elizabeth in the Western Cape. And there's Jeremy with why did you say?
Eastern Cape.
Eastern Cape.
Eastern Cape.
Okay.
And then we have Jeremy with us from Berlin.
Yes.
And he's a thinker, he's a writer, and he's also a student sociology.
Yes.
And yeah. So before we start, I would like you all to, who's listening in and who's watching us, if you could write whether you have found a purpose, what it is, and how did you come about discovering it. You can just put it and we can take it on later on. And if you haven't, or you're still trying to find out, please also put in your comments and what you'd like to hear from us, and put in your questions. So I would like each one of y'all, maybe start with Greg or Jeremy, on how did you come about finding your life purpose, and is it an elusive thing?
It's interesting. So the past few years, I've always come about sort of different teaching seminars, workshops, where it's all about finding your life purpose and what's your life purpose. And I always watched the videos or attended the workshops, and I always just felt like, there's something I'm not getting, or I'm sort of missing it, or I can't put it into one sentence. And recently, it's becoming ever more clear to me that my life purpose really isn't something I can put in one sentence. It's not something I can say, like I can turn over a rock and say, this is my life purpose. My life purpose is to do X, Y, and Z or something. To me, it's really what my life purpose is, or what the purpose of life in general is to be fully alive and to be fully Jeremy every day to the best of my ability, to be more of who I want to be, and to be more of that which really feels right to me. So I guess the way, or where I am now in regards to my life purpose, is really what would fulfill me most, and how can I go about doing that every day in every moment as good as I can. That's really what the meaning of life purpose is to me. I think that's the best you can put it now.
And
Well, thanks,
Greg,
Jeremy.
thanks.
Yeah, so I think in a similar way to Jeremy, and it's a complicated. This is a very philosophical discussion we're having today. So there's no black and white, and it's all grey. and I think, and I often struggle because I know I'm a grey person, and I think we live in a world that's very black and white. I think the majority of people are black and white thinkers. It's right and wrong, and good and evil, etc. And they don't reside in this world of flux that I think on the transpersonal dimension we enter into, where chaos and order, I don't want to get too deep now, but where chaos and order coexist. So when I started out, I've always been interested in theology and philosophy as a child. And I think my whole life has been looking at the different religions, or I would call myself a seeker when I was younger, lots of self-help books. But again, the self-help books and attending some of these personal growth courses also just didn't seem to hold water and carry any sort of depth. So I left the books behind, and I really started feeling like I needed to live life and question everything, and with critical thinking and challenging any truth that came my way, and try and find my own truth. And as we were saying just before we went live with the webinar, I've traveled extensively around the world to vastly different places: Inca Trail, Machu Picchu, up to Mount Sinai, India, Nepal, camped on the banks of the River Nile. And my friends would have told you, Greg's trying to find himself. And I would have denied it. All I was trying to do, I would tell them that I was enjoying finding these different cultures and getting out of my comfort zone. But I think now, looking back 20 years on, I was looking for myself. And as I said to the panelists earlier on, I needed to go on the journey to find myself, to realize that I was in all those places because I'm here right now. And I think, as Jeremy alluded to, when you're doing life's purpose, your life's purpose, or when you're getting meaning in life is when it's giving you vitality, when you start feeling like you're energized. When you're feeling stressed and suffering, you're definitely moving away from your life's purpose or your life's meaning. So I think for me, it's always, am I feeling energized or am I feeling de-energized, to know whether I'm tracking right. And I often, I say to people, many people check in with their heads and think with their heads, and you've got to start feeling it in your soul or your heart or your body, your intuition, really. Sometimes the head can lead you astray. So it's a complicated question. I think often we define ourselves by what we are. And I like the fact that you said, I'm Jeremy, I'm Greg. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a coach. I'm not my title. Even though Greg is a title, it's the one thing that's been with me from birth. It's not even a nickname. So I define myself by my name, rather than anything else, because I have a number of different roles rather than anything that I am. So who am I is an interesting question. I like the question. Thanks, Radhika.
Thank you, Greg. Corey.
Thank you, Radhika. Okay, so as we discussed earlier, I come from an engineering environment. So with engineering people, while I'm still in engineering, we like first principles. So one of the things that I've realized early in my life, so after I studied engineering, I did like Greg, I studied psychology and industrial psychology, because I even saw that the engineering environment is actually about people. And I think one of the things that I realized very early on, and I'm going to use maybe one or two quotes to explain it, is we sometimes think there is one world where there's actually, if we say there are 7 billion people on earth, there are 7 billion and one world. So we all live, and this is actually what Jeremy and Greg said. It's about self-exploration. It's about understanding that you are, and let me go for my first quote, you are the center of your universe, not of the universe. And when I sometimes joke and I say size matters, don't shoot me for that. The size of your world, meaning how much have I explored who I really am, actually determines how big your world is. Because you are not the world. You are a best copy in yourself of that world. So it takes me to my second quote. Nothing in the outer world has meaning until the inner world defines it. Now, to maybe make it practical, I always say to people, and I don't know how many attendees are here, but let's say we are 4 people on the panel. So my question normally to people would be, how many koris are there? Now, most people will say 1, and I'll say no, there are 4. There are the kori that I am, that you most probably met the first time today. And then there's the kori that you've recreated in your head. And why those are different koris is because if I die today, I hopefully would not die in your head. So I say all people die twice. You die the first time, the sun doesn't rise or the sun rises without you. And you die the second time when the last word is spoken about you. But what's the impact of that? And here's the crux of it. Do people give you credit, or do people realize or identify you by who you are, or the copy they've made of you in their minds? Let me make it more practical. if you go to an interview, do they appoint you after the interview for who you are as a fully sort of defined person, or do they appoint you for what you left in their minds, the recreated Corey? Surely they appoint you for what you've left in their minds. So if you haven't answered all their questions, you haven't told them about yourself, they'll only decide who you are on what you've left with them. So why is that profound for me? It's profound for me because, and I want to somehow go straight to the point of what NLP says. What's the meaning of life? It's the meaning you give it. Because if I live in a copy of the world, then surely I have my own identity. I have my own journey. I have my own what matters to me. Sometimes when I share with people how I think, I will say, let me ask the question. Radhika, if I asked you to think of the color red, what comes to mind?
A car.
A car.
Red car.
Jeremy, with you, if I asked you a color red, what comes to mind?
Anger.
Anger. And Greg, what comes to
Nice.
mind?
I thought of blood and I thought of a bull.
Okay. Now, I think that's one of the best illustrations to show us how actually different our worlds are. So it's impossible for me to tell you what should matter to you. It should actually be impossible for anyone in your environment to tell you exactly what should matter to you, except yourself. And to conclude, I've made a note here. So we're all highly unique. But what influences in my approach to that, influences our uniqueness, is the fears that drive us, how we see rewards. And we haven't spoken to Greg about profiling and personality profiling, and let me not go there, but let me say, in the work environment I am, we work with a lot of people that want clarity and not necessarily harmony. So we make a lot of people cry. Because in my world, if the answer is 3, it's not 3.111, it's not 3, it's 3. So we don't compromise in terms of the answer to accommodate people, that's why they say, I won't make the joke about engineers because they'll shoot me, but engineering people allow very little thought of harmony and bonding with other people. Our preference is to just live in the world of creation, reality, and make calculations and get the answer. When people cry, we walk away from it. When people are overly emotional about what happened to other people, we don't experience that emotions that intensely. So to conclude, my point is, what I've learned in my journey in life is that everyone's highly individual. And the only way you can find out what matters to you is by the exploration and discovery of who you are. And how, and I put 3 words down, how your conceptual world reflects itself in terms of being relevant, in having a perspective that's valuable, and the value that your world adds to other people and to yourself. So what matters to me is my definition of what is important.
Yeah, I think we'll come to that, the value that you add to the others, especially when we come to discuss the leadership, the role of purpose and leadership in business.
So that's my discovery from life, that it's highly personal.
It's highly personal. Yeah, talking about myself, I've always, I grew up, for me, expressing myself was very, very critical, especially because in my family, I was raised in a family where I wasn't allowed to express myself. So I found it through writing. And so the first career I chose was as a writer, as a journalist. And then I thought writing was my purpose, right? And in, I think 2017, when I discovered that creating art, I started doing art. But I would never say, people started calling me an artist, like what Greg was saying, you know, you are not a psychologist, he's not a psychologist, he's not the label or the title. And people started calling me an artist, and I found that very weird. But I never would say, I think when I create art, that's when I realized what my purpose was, because when I created art, I wouldn't see doing art as a purpose. I would see the feeling that it gave me. It gave me this immense satisfaction, joy, and I felt this immensely as a human being, very expanded. And that's what I focus on, that feeling. And I think purpose, that's when I realized that even writing is not my purpose. Like both writing and art is a means to get to that state of expansion, happiness, and fulfillment. So, yeah, and so coming to that, do you want to add something, Jeremy? Or?
I just think when you mentioned being an artist, I think it's what I think it was Corey that spoke to it, and even Jeremy, probably all of us actually. And I think that we were often speaking about the outside world coming in rather than the inner going out. And I think art or writing is expressing and actually being quite vulnerable, because you're putting everything out on canvas for people to see, or you're writing things down for everyone to see. You know, it's the inner world that's being expressed. I've worked with some artists before who have huge, an artist and even a fashion designer that were too scared to design fashion and too scared to paint because people are going to criticize the drawing. And I'm like, but why would you worry about that? You've chosen a profession, both those professions, which are highly subjective, you know, and people are going to say, I hate that outfit, or I love that outfit. And so we can't be worried about that. And that's why this thing about life purpose or life meaning is so important, that it must come from within. And we shouldn't fear that judgment that Corey said, because the minute we have a perception, we're judging reality. And so we all have a different version of, like he said with that red exercise, you know, we all have a different version of what red jumps out for us, you know. So
yeah, exactly, Greg. I've also seen that with a lot of people. They're very scared to express, and even scared to share what they create, share their poetry or writing outside because of the fear of judgment. And I believe that purpose is actually self-expression, expressing yourself in any manner. So the means to get to that expression can be various, right?
Yeah. I like what you said when you, Radhika, when you said, I then discovered that even writing wasn't my purpose. It was just a means to express my purpose. I also like what Greg said about the vitality. So sort of in those moments where you just feel so alive, you feel so turned on in a way, like the on switch has been turned on. And then it doesn't even matter that, that's my experience. It doesn't even matter which passageway or which filter it goes through, because whichever passageway or whichever filter it goes through, it's going to be something that really fulfills me. And then something else comes up, and then something else comes up.
Exactly. So it's not, yeah, go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, I think I want to touch on, because we're all nicely on the same page. One thing I've found very helpful for myself is clarifying goals, because sometimes we get lost in the opinions of others, and believe me, because we get credit for what they have in their heads, it depends on how important they are to us in our lives. But let's jump beyond that. Once you've clarified a goal, for me as a clarity person, it's easy to say I'm working towards my goal. And whatever input comes, I measure it against the goal, not against the input, which always gives me that clarity. And I like what Greg said, to live from within. And we all feel vulnerable when we put our stuff out there. But what I was also saying earlier, the less you put out, the more people have to guess. The more they guess, the more gossip and everything that goes with it actually becomes you in their eyes. And yesterday we had a little webinar where someone asked us to clarify what brand means, your personal brand. And I read a while back, someone said, your personal brand is the person who speaks on your behalf when you're not there. And
I heard that too.
Yeah, and the more we build our personal brand, if it's important, the more we become aware of what happens within. And the more you are authentic with what's in, the less you have to pretend who you are, and the less vulnerable you feel, because you go towards what solves your within. And I don't say be reckless towards other people with it, but I generally find people that can love other people first love themselves. People that can share first share with themselves. People that can do something first do it for themselves. So if you don't clarify your inner world extremely well, to have purpose to the outer world, to me is a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I want to ask Greg, maybe to help the audience who's listening in, is that we find a lot of people who are afraid of what other people are going to say. So what do you tell your clients?
You put me on a pedestal, or you put me on the spot by saying, let me ask Greg, because he should know this answer. Okay, but I think I do. I mean, I've always got an answer, so I always have an opinion, and I have thoughts on everything and anything, you know. So, and I'm not scared to share them. Just quickly before I said that, just back to when you were talking about the art and Corey's 3 words, and they were words I used last year and even the year before, often in my talks, and it was courage, commitment, and conviction. Are 3 things that I felt everyone needed: courage, commitment, and conviction, in order to get, you know, off your butts and start moving in the direction, as Corey said, of your goal, you know. But just to get back to your point, so you need those 3 things. So you have to overcome your fears. But I think it's the second biggest fear is the fear of public speaking, or the fear of appearing in public. I'm sure many people are even afraid to come on here, you know, because we can be judged by the people that are watching us. And I remember, I don't know how long ago it was where I read this, and I do many talks. I've acted on the stage my whole life, but I get nervous every time. Every time before I do a presentation, I still get nervous. And I say my anxiety can go anywhere between, if it's out of 10, anything between 5 and 8. Today I was quite calm because Radhika is running this show. I've just got to show up and just be there, you know, so it's her gig. But it had a very interesting, and it could even have been dummies, or, you know, public speaking for dummies, one of those dummies books. But it made such sense to me. And if you just look at numbers, in an audience of 100 people, 33% are going to love you, 33% are going to hate you, and 33% are going to go, you know. So we're never going to please 100 people out of 100. And I think the minute we can lose that fear and accept that, like same if you're writing a book or drawing a painting, exactly the same numbers. 33% will love it, 33% will probably hate it, and 33% will go, don't even have a comment about that. And that's just numbers. And it's tremendously freeing. And it's not arrogance. It just allows you to be calm and understand that it's okay for people not to like you.
Yeah.
And I think that was one very important thing that I found out. And then also just in my own life, in my earlier days, not wanting to offend people, very much a people pleaser when I was younger. And I could never understand, you know, why people would want to be angry with me. And until I realized one day, but other people make me angry. So how can it be okay for me to be angry with others, but expect other people not to dislike me or be angry with me? And that was also a freeing moment when I realized it's okay for people to be angry with me. I'm not even offended if someone's angry with me. They have a right to be angry, or have a right to be to dislike me, and that's okay. And again, only if you like yourself, and once you've integrated and start liking yourself, is it okay? Do you give other people permission not to like you?
Yes.
It's what Corey was saying, that you gotta first like yourself before you. So it's people mirror us, right, as well. And Corey had also said something to me previously. It's about selling art, that you're not going to please everyone, but why focus on that 8%, right? What was it, Corey, that you said something about?
Yes, I say generally when it comes to what people like, between 6 and 8 out of people, 10 out of people, it goes with what you said, would generally not find what you do attractive, whether it's your personality, whether it's the way you dress, whether it's the art you make. And then 10 to 20% will be interested, and maybe 10 to 20% will be committed. And the general sales approach is not to convince those who are not interested. Take the committed ones, make them part of your life. Take the interested ones, make it so interesting that they become committed, and forget about the rest. And I also want to say, you know, when you look at a picture, I actually made the point here of my points, just desensitize yourself a little bit. We are all worried about vulnerability. We are all, like Greg was saying, I mean, I also speak a lot. Every time you are nervous, and I'm nervous for 2 reasons. The first one is because I worry about vulnerability. And the second one is I don't want to waste someone else's time by not being valuable to them. And so the other example, I mean, if you show a group photo to people that they in themselves, who do they look at first? You just look at yourself. You don't give a hell about the others. I mean, I always say 90% of people don't give a shit. The other 10% lie about it. Look, we are so self-centered in our own existence, in living this internal world, that if you have to remember where you attended a very bad speech or where someone said that it's hard to recall. We don't even remember that. We just say, as long as it's not me. So desensitize a little bit and get your inner world out there to serve you well.
Yeah, so talking about, I think I would like to also ask some questions that we got from one of our viewers, is on meaning and purpose. And in a way, what really matters is what he's asking, and how can one design their lives to realize that? And how can kids, youth, or adults be taught to live from what really matters?
I guess the first thing, I'll try my best, and then the other ones can just carry on. The first thing that comes to mind is what Corey said, that it is very personal. So what it's actually going to look like in its manifestation, so to say, is going to be very individual. But I think the first way to go about it is really just to ask oneself, what can I do that would really light me up? What can I do that's really going to fulfill me and that I really want to do? And it doesn't even have to be something that's easy. Like, it can be really, really freaking hard. It can be really just like, I really want to do it, but I'm not good at it. And then just keep going in that direction. And it's my experience that doors start opening up, and the doors are never the doors that I thought that they were. It's always different doors.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's the first thing that comes to me. But I think, so on the one hand, it's individual. On the other hand, though, I think that's the same for everyone. It's the same for everyone, like that mode of following whichever way life's taking you, while you're really doing that, what really inspires you.
Yeah.
It really fills you.
Because life is non-linear, right? There's no one way to get.
No, there's no.
Yeah.
And I don't think everyone has one very linear purpose where it's like, that's it. Like that's it. It can be many different things. It might be a theme. It might be a taste, a certain taste. But I would really oppose the idea of it being one very, 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 very specific thing.
Great. Thank you.
I think something I've never thought about, and it was quite a scary thought, and I jotted it down, in regard to that question, like, what do you tell your children? How do you know this thing about going down the right path? And I've never thought of it in this way, but and I wrote down, if it's scary. Right?
Yeah.
Sorry?
You have two kids. And
so I have two young kids, 8 and 5 years old. If it's scary, it's probably the right path. If it's easy, it's probably not the right path. Okay.
Really?
So if it's challenging, and I've never thought of it in that way. I mean, I often use I even did a talk recently called "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway." But it has to be scary, because if it's scary, there's something that's holding you back, and it's normally, that's why they say outside your comfort zone is where growth happens, and you need to push yourself. So it needs to be scary, and this is why we need to encourage courage, because that's where the learning is. You're never going to learn anything if you keep taking the easy route. And I think Scott Peck, all those guys that wrote about the road less traveled, we need to take the road less traveled. And I had a challenging debate with a very intellectual, philosophical colleague, let's call him, in one of my talks. And I said, in order to self-actualize, and I didn't think I was going to talk about this today, but in order to self-actualize, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, belonging is quite low down on the hierarchy. You've got to leave the belonging. You've got to leave your herd if you want to self-actualize. That's why self-actualization sits at the top of that pyramid. Now, his challenge was, well, what happens if you want to self-actualize inside the herd? Maybe that's your place, that's your happy space. And I said, well, that's fine, but you're probably not going to self-actualize, because how do you self-actualize if you're herd-actualized? So maybe we can call it herd actualization within the herd, but you need to leave your group culture, race, everything. You've got to move way beyond that if you want to, and that's scary. It's tremendously scary. In South Africa, people were called traitors for doing that. In government, it's cold outside this grouping. You get excommunicated in some religious groupings if you challenge that belief system. Oh, wow. So we have to have courage, and we have to lead the herd. So if it's scary, it means you're probably on the right path, or at least you're on a path of growth.
Yeah.
I really want to sort of connect to both what Jerry and Greg were saying, and I want to start with the word courage. One of the things, I have the benefit to also be a parent, not a successful one, but I'm a parent. So, because one of the things you must realize, your children's not you. Your failures mustn't go to your children. Your fears mustn't go to your children. I think you must have the courage to allow them to have courage to explore their own worlds, to find their own definition when they are young. Because once you've passed through that experience of young people, things change. And from a psychology point of view, Greg might explain that far better. We go through different phases in our lives, which allow us to develop certain things. And as a parent, if we don't have the courage to leave our children to live their life best possible, and I mean, it's harder with daughters than with guys, because I mean, you want to protect your daughters. All of us want to do that. But you really have to bite the bullet to ask yourself every time when you want to interject into your children's life, what would be the purpose of this? Is it to the benefit of their life, or is it actually something that I'm scared of and I don't want them to experience it? That self journey with courage sits on both sides, but it's different courages. Different for a parent to let go, and different for a child to, and it's the uneasy times, the challenging times in life that really defines the good life, because you get to understand that bigger world, stretch it a little bit. And I want to conclude by saying, one of my friends always say, your biggest problem is your biggest problem. Meaning, if you had huge, big problems in your life and a bigger problem comes along, it's a small problem. If you are always protected from the bigger problems, a small problem is a big problem. And I'll give you a good example. People jump up and down about how difficult the world is at the moment. And imagine going back, let's say 300 years. You travel Africa with 5 or 6 people, no hospital, no Pick n Pay, no shop, no place to sleep. The lions that you see are not in the zoo. If you fall ill, there's nowhere to go except to help yourself. So in comparison, I would say the life that I have now is an easy life, because their biggest problem was far bigger than my biggest problem at the moment. So let the people experience life, define themselves, so that they can have that inner courage to live their inner world in and out the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think parents, I don't have kids, but then when we were kids, people used to ask us, what do you want to be when you grow up? So I think that in other than allowing your kids to experience the world for what it is, and instead of protecting them and just let them explore, you should also ask them, actually, instead of asking them, what do you want to be when you grow up? I think we can change the narrative and start asking them, how do you want to make a difference in the world? What do you want to contribute? And I think.
Just, and I said this to, and my boys are very young, and sometimes I put some interesting ideas in their head, and I said to them, you know, you guys, like I'm repeating that, they're 8 and 6, they're growing up in a world very different to us. And I was saddened to think of the kind of school that they have to go with. I saw a picture the other day of a school in Cape Town with little glass boxes, that each of these kids are sitting in a glass box. And and I think this is just us putting stuff on, because my kids are so excited about wearing a mask. They think it's exciting, and you know, that's the world they're growing up in. It's slightly different. So it's perception again for us. You know, these kids are quite okay with it. And but what I wanted to say was that I said to them, you guys that are being born now are going to be really interesting adults because of the world that you're growing up in compared to where we are. You know, and I think that anyone being born today is going to be so different to us. And I don't even think we can comprehend where those children are going to be, or the kind of jobs that they could be doing. And while you were talking, Corey, I was thinking about Khalil Gibran talks about having kids or children. And he says, the adult is like a bow and the children are like an arrow. And all we got to do is be the bow, and we need to shoot that arrow and make sure it's going in whatever direction it goes. But that's our only job, is to launch your children into the world, I think with a stable foundation, and for them to make their decision. You know, if we only indoctrinated our children, I've often told my eldest how much I've learned from him, you know, and this whole thing of top down, parenting works both ways, and we can learn so much from the children, and the world would never change if we only went top down. You know, so I think it's great to learn from our kids. So that lady that asked that question, how do we teach our kids? I think ask them, what do you, you know, where do you see yourself going? Which path do you want to take, without trying to indoctrinate the child? You know, offer them the options and let them make that them make their path. And we learn through mistakes, so we learn through making mistakes.
Yeah, I actually saw, and Ritika, there's quite a nice thing. I'm quite involved with gender development as well, women development. And I mean, the women will a lot of times say this glass ceiling that the world has, we can't get through it. And I saw an interesting thing today. Of the top 10 youngest billionaires in the world, 4 of the 10 are women. And again, the youngsters, back to Greg, what you said, they don't have the limitations that I grew up in a society of top down. The government will tell you how it works and you don't challenge it. Where the children of today challenges because they have more access to stuff that my generation had ever. So you're not going to protect your children from something happening. The moment they log into the internet, they can do whatever they want. I can promise you, you're not going to block them. So what I've learned, rather than direct support, and like you guys were saying, let it be interactive. Get their input of how they can do. We can learn from them. Youngsters, I mean, I'm also on Instagram and I also try to get a few followers. There are people 7, 8 years old, they have 3 million followers. Can you imagine how powerful they are? They're not even 10 years old. The world's changed completely to a world of serving leadership, understand the problem, and allow people to co-pilot with you. So that would be my message to parents. I know it's shit scary, but you'll have to have a relationship with your children. Don't try and teach them how the world works. They'll most probably be able to teach you how the world works.
Should I go on to, anyone wants to add? Should I go on to when Corey, you were talking about servant leadership. So the question was about obviously coming to business and leadership. So as we evolve as human beings and as leaders, so there is something I've continually heard is something called servant leadership, right? The guys in management and leadership talk about. And so what they're essentially talking about servant leadership is being able to evolve that come out of attending to your own individual or very personal needs and coming and serving the greater humanity, right? But this, I feel, for most of 80% or 90% of the time is just conceptualists and idea, but people are not really experiencing that for themselves and not really feeling it. So do organizations and leaders really mean what they say, other than just serving themselves and making profit and money?
So let's ask Jeremy. We give him the difficult stuff. This one I don't have an answer for. We'll chat.
Yeah, he did write an article on money and made a video on it too.
I think on the one hand, to start off with, I salute every organization and every business that's really intent on making their product or their service and the benefit for all people, sort of doing something that is not only going to give them profit, but will possibly help serve the environment in some way or bring actual benefit to the lives of people. That goes beyond just making new products to consume, for example. I do think that it's very hard in our current, and this is sort of more the sociological side of things, it's very hard in our current society for businesses to actually do that because profit is not really made with things that benefit everyone.
Stuff.
And it's very hard in my view, and I'm not a CEO, I'm just a young guy who likes thinking about these things. So I guess there's better people to ask on this call. But in my view, it's going to be extremely difficult to truly be a serving leader or actually lead as an organization or a business in a very serving way, because the economic and incentives and the sort of structural drives underneath are so, it's like a current you're swimming against. And the competition is just going to do something that's, for example, harmful to the environment.
Mm. So
and they're going to make more profit. So I guess what I'm trying to say is in this system, I think it's very hard. It sounds nice. I salute everyone trying it. I don't see it working out in the future unless there's real systemic change in certain economic structures and yeah.
Thanks. So, what do you think? Is it as pessimistic? Because I have a very hopeful view of the future.
Me
We
too.
collaborate, not compete.
I think, Greg, if you go, I would like to say something as we in small medium enterprise environment.
Did you want me to go first, and you would follow on?
Yes.
So yeah, it's. I mean, I work in organizations as a coach, and I've been pitching spirituality in the workplace. Let's call it that, okay? Because that was my terminology, spirituality in the workplace. And I don't like to think I'm ahead of the time. I know I'm ahead of my time. And I was pitching this 15 years ago, and people were looking at me like I was dumb, okay? And it's coming now in the next, like certainly over this next phase, spirituality in the workplace, servant leadership, conscious leadership, mindful leadership, all these kind of words are coming into the workplace. And I think leaders are starting to understand, as Corey was saying just now, that this authoritarian style of leadership doesn't work, okay? And I don't know Richard Branson. I've just heard of how he operates, but the idea of Richard Branson's style of leadership appears to be what people are kind of trying to get to, where you lower yourself to a level. You're still going to be a tough boss. Ultimately, you're chasing numbers. You've got to chase profit, otherwise you've got to lose people. But there's a better way of doing it, where you can sort of lead from in amongst the masses, and at least put yourself at their level. Most top CEOs and top MDs don't get down in the trenches. I was working at a company quite recently. I worked for there for a number of years, and I'm working from the director level right down to the guys on the shop floor, and I have a very good idea of that business, whereas the CEOs and that are making decisions here and have never done the packing or whatever, and then the guys at the bottom would get so frustrated. And I think servant leadership, I don't know enough about it, but I understand servant leadership is more about lowering yourself to this level so that you can lead from within and you understand your people. I think Mother Teresa once said to one of the Fords from the Ford Motor Company, when he says, "Have you got a tip for me?" And he said, and this I also learned 10 years ago, and she said, "Do you know your people and do you love your people?" And I don't think there's many CEOs or MDs that know their people or love their people. There's a series on TV, and let me give it a plug on a channel called Undercover Boss, where the boss puts on a disguise and goes down and suddenly works amongst the different tiers. And it's a phenomenal documentary to watch, because his eyes are open so much by lowering himself down to that level and seeing what actually goes on inside his business. So the way I understand servant leadership is being there for your people. And even in my own life, I've realized, and I changed careers from sales, where I was earning wonderful money, chasing targets, but being quite stressed, back to what I originally studied, which was, and I felt empty doing that, so I left. And I took 2 steps back to go back and study for 2 years to become a psychologist and help people, because I always wanted to help people. And then I tell people the interesting thing is money flows anyway. When you don't make money your goal, chasing targets, money comes in regardless, because now you're doing something and you're sort of fitting into the flow of what's supposed to be happening, and then the money will come anyway. So I'm optimistic, Radhika.
Okay.
But it is, you need money, so you need profits. So you have to still be a hard boss, and you need to get rid of people if they're not pulling their weight. So you can't always just serve your staff. There's a job to be done, but you don't have to be dictatorial, or you can be authoritative.
Like Jeremy was also saying that when it's the right thing, it gives you fulfillment. I think the doors open and the money comes and everything works out.
Yes.
Corey.
Yeah, I want to start where Jeremy sort of highlighted how difficult it is to make profit. And I can tell you something. When the profit goes out, it's like love. When love walks out the back door, or what I say, money walks out the back door, love walks out the front door. And it's the same for business. I mean, at the end of the day, the other way around, but it's the same for business. If you don't make money and you have to pay salaries, I mean, the pressure is tremendous, and most businesses are suffering from that at the moment. So that's where it starts. Okay, but there's a word that Greg used a lot. It's understand. So in my world, a serving leader means an understanding leader, because serving doesn't mean necessarily you serve people. Serving means you serve the purpose of the company. You serve the profit of the company. You serve the people in that company. So the company, you look at the company. I always say in business, when I work my day-to-day business, there are only 2 important words for me: ownership and alignment. I want everyone that works with me in a company to feel like they own that company. And they all need to, through that ownership, align with each other to say, let's not break all speed records while traveling in the wrong direction. And it brings me back to what we opened with. And there's a term they called, and it's an NLP term, the map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. The inner world is not the outer world. I only have access to people's maps when they feel comfortable sharing with me. So if I'm autocratic with them, I have no access to their maps, or I have conditional access. When I serve them by understanding what the challenges are, I have, through ownership, access to all of those maps unconditionally, meaning everyone's thinking of what's the best for the company. And you can't apply that to all companies in all spaces. I mean, there's a difference between the military and Google. There's a difference between consulting and construction. But generally, the more you can serve the purpose, what the company does, the people, so that they open their maps to you, then Greg is 100% right to get into the trenches. But if someone in the trenches can have an honest channel to me coming up and saying, listen, yes, Corey, I think we're missing the point here, and I acknowledge that person as my co-owner by serving that purpose, I have that full input towards me without experiencing it myself. And I think that's where the world is slowly moving to, is more and more information are spread. I always, and let me not say it here, but social media brought along a lot of disruption, but a lot of fairness as well. I mean, you can't try and be in a road rage, you'll most probably end up somewhere where you don't have to explain, someone can see what you did. So we have a bit of an more open society. But that open society also puts a lot of pressure on business and business processes. So hopefully we start understanding as CEOs that the time of total power and forcing companies to do what they should be doing just means we disconnect to every one of that company's maps. And it actually just means that you'll have to take out the stick every day. Carrot will just go out the window. And those companies will not survive, not in the way that the world works now. That's my feel on it. I mean, that's how I operate the companies I'm in.
Okay, great. There's one question from Facebook. Is it important to identify the purpose of life, but is it also not important not to lose spontaneity of life and go with it, its flow sometimes, to enrich it, add value to your purpose, rather than staying too much focused in pursuit of the purpose? I don't know if it's getting a bit too philosophical or something.
I lost you there, but Jeremy said something about that earlier on when he said he didn't. I don't think you used the word dynamic, but I think the idea. I think if I understand the lady's question, you need to know more or less where you're going. That's all. Just more or less where you're going, and just keep reinventing yourself. So this idea of having a dynamic version of myself. I keep saying I don't know who or what I'm going to be in 10 years' time. I do want to write a book, so I might be an author and I might be talking about my book, but it's sort of on the back burner. But it's, I might have 10 different paths leading out, and I'll meander between those paths because, like I said, I've only been a psychologist now for 12 years, 13 years now, I think. But I don't want to be a psychologist for the rest of my life. I want to keep moving, keep learning, keep growing. So as long as you're moving in a general direction and you're not moving backwards or arguably stagnant, I think then it's good. I don't know how much time we've got, but I want to just talk about, you said values or value-laden living. If we're leading a value-laden life, if we know which direction we're going in, your stress and suffering will be low. But the minute you're not leading a value-laden life, your stress and suffering go up. And that's when you start feeling this disconnect. So trust your instincts. And if you're feeling stressed and suffering, you're probably going in the wrong direction. And even though I said just now, this is not being scared. Stress and suffering is something different. Being scared is, I'm just too scared to go on my rightful path. Get on the rightful path. Be scared. And if you hit a brick wall, take a turning and carry on. Radhika, I think part of your travels has been just like that. You've been probably petrified at times, but you just keep going, and it's wonderful. And doors keep opening up, and now I see you blossoming and flowering at times. But we go through our struggles. So a dynamic sense of self is extremely important. There's not one way.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking, if suppose your value is finding fulfillment and happiness. So there's this inner compass, right? As Greg was saying, if you feel uncomfortable, you're not feeling good. So your inner compass guides you to tell that you're not actually going towards your purpose, right? And So, yeah, Corey, you can
Just-
say your last thing, and then we wrap it up, and we can, because
What-
there's someone in the question as well. I just wanted to mention is that they want us to wrap up the entire thing. Wants me to wrap up the So I will try my best to wrap up if I'm missing any points, and we can also do it later on after we've done with the session. We can wrap
Yep.
up the key points. And
Yeah, just a quick one, Radhika. I think one thing we must understand, and that's a point that Greg just raised, about being valuable. When you, there are, let me not try, I'll try and answer it shorter, in the sense that we all need something to feel important about. Just go and think about it. We all need something to feel important about. And it generally runs with value. So if you add value, people will give you recognition or appreciation. So in the search of your purpose, you will most probably, and I'm not very much of a purpose person, I must be honest. If you ask me what's my life purpose, it's purely to live a fulfilling life. That's all I want. My purpose is to have a fulfilling life. And if someone else's life is 300 million times bigger than mine, I don't care. It must just be fulfilling for me. But it must also be, you cannot live a fulfilling life by just taking. You just have to give as well. Because by that giving, someone will need you, and we all need something to feel important about. So the value add that you pick up through your journey is part of a purpose, a fulfilling life. It is give and take. So what I'm trying to say, don't worry so much about your purpose that you never give back, because someone who never gives will never receive. That I can promise you.
yeah, great. Anyways, I was remembering this Picasso's quote. It was exactly that, but I don't remember verbatim. But something like the purpose of an artist or a painter is to paint, but then no, the meaning is to paint, but then the purpose is to give back. You know what you're saying as an artist, even. So shall we wrap up? Anyone wants to say anything? And my wrapping up. From my end, from my perspective, I would also like you all to wrap up whatever you'll learn, the wisdom today shared by all of us. Is for me, it is essentially what we were talking about in terms of purposes. Joseph Campbell's quote: "Follow your bliss." It's essentially that, right? What we were to sum it up. And yeah, and anyone wants to say something else to wrap up? And also the other one to wrap up is learning from within to also lead from within, because that's where our purpose comes out. That's where our values are. And we must have the courage to do, we must also have the courage to follow our bliss, right? And most people don't do that. Yeah.
Happy. My wrap will be 3 words. Greg's, have the courage to live from within. Don't be too worried what other people say and do, because they're not going to live your life. You have to live your life. And the last one, back to what Jeremy said, is also travel, explore. The bigger you throw your nets, the bigger your world. The bigger your world, the more you will understand how to add value to yourself and to other people. And as I said, my purpose of life is to live a fulfilling life, which is a life I really, and they've done lots of research. A happy life is a life with good relationships. Being the richest guy in the graveyard is not the only answer. It's about relationships and about journeying together.
Great. Love that. Greg, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think just, yeah, for me, we've alluded to it quite a bit, and I think your talk was quite centered around should we be other-centric, etc. But I think it's so important to become a little bit more self-centric, to be a bit more compassionate about ourselves, to love ourselves more. To Corey's point, I think it's in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. In order to get into the afterworld, there's only 2 questions you're going to be asked: did you give joy, and did you receive joy? So it never says, did I just give? I think even in the Christian teachings, it talks about love thy neighbor as thyself. Now we all take that to mean I must love thy neighbor more than myself, but it says love thy neighbor as thyself. So I should be equal to my neighbor, and we tend to forget that part. And just the last point for me was, to ask yourself every time you're trying to make a decision or every time you're at a crossroads, to ask if this choice is propelling you towards an inspiring future or if it's keeping you stuck in the past. And that's an extremely important question to ask yourself when you're stuck at a crossroads. You know? So, and not to be scared. That's what I keep saying. Courage. Thanks, Radhika.
Thank you, Will. Jeremy? Do you want to go, Jeremy? Or I think he's frozen. Oh, I froze.
He
Jeremy's
looks quite frozen.
He looks quite frozen. Yeah, so let's wrap it up. And I think in that sense, I think we human beings, we tend to make things so complicated. And what I've gathered from this conversation is that we've all want to be happy, fulfilled. That's our core values, actually, for each one of us. And it resonates with the book I'm currently reading is by Dalai Lama, where he says, The Art of Happiness. He says the sole purpose of life is to be happy. And it's exactly that what it is. I think what we learn, what we need to learn to do, and we provided various insights on how to do it, is just follow what makes you happy. Do the things that make you happy. And that's the compass that'll guide you towards your purpose and finding. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for meeting Greg. Jeremy, thanks, Radhika. It was lovely.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Jeremy, Greg, and for sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us.